They say humiliation is worse when it's quiet, when no one screams or throws anything, but instead strips you down slowly with glances, silence, and polite indifference. And I felt every inch of it in that pre-op room, sitting on cold vinyl, my hospital gown gaping open in the back, chest tight not from the procedure I was about to undergo, but from the subtle way I was being dehumanized by the people entrusted with my care. And what made it even more infuriating is that I wasn't just any patient. I was this hospital's largest living donor, the namesake of the surgical wing where I was now being delayed, dismissed, and degraded by a white surgeon who looked at me like I'd taken a wrong turn into his universe. But none of that mattered when I first walked in alone, clutching my phone and my medical file, not a clipboard or entourage in sight. Just me. Black, middle-aged, woman, tired, and not wearing a lab coat, which meant in their eyes, I couldn't possibly be important. The nurse at the front didn't even look up when I said my name, just mumbled something about one of the community referrals and handed me paperwork with Medicaid, pre-checked, which was laughable because I'd never even been on Medicaid. Not that it should matter, but in this place, apparently it did. If you agree with judging someone based on their need instead of their worth is wrong. Like and subscribe, because I still feel the sting of that day in every breath I take. I had fasted for over 12 hours, was scheduled for an early morning procedure to correct an abdominal adhesion that had been causing months of pain, and yet I was made to wait, then wait again, then told casually by the nurse that the surgeon's running behind, with a wink that suggested I wasn't exactly a high priority. And that's when I first heard his name, Dr. Brent Callahan, spoken like it should reassure me. Though all it did was send a chill through me when he finally walked in. Didn't greet me, didn't say doctor, or even Ms. Jackson, just scanned my chart, hesitated, and said, "So, Simone, we need to talk about your options." Like he was explaining something complicated to a child, and my voice caught when I said, "Actually, it's Dr. Jackson," which he ignored entirely, launching into a slow, rehearsed monologue about how they were triaging or access due to staffing limitations. Though the vibe in the hallway said otherwise, doctors laughing, monitors humming, the place running smoothly for everyone except me. I asked if my original slot was still open, and he replied, "We're working on accommodating all our patients, especially those who might need a little extra guidance." Like I was a damn charity case who stumbled in from the street, and I sat there frozen, realizing this man didn't see me at all, not as a fellow doctor, not even as a person, just as a burden. The worst part? No one around him corrected him. The nurse at his side nodded, tight-lipped, as if this was protocol, and when I mentioned I'd scheduled this weeks ago, and cleared it with the chief of surgery himself, he smiled like I was name-dropping, then said, "We'll let you know what time we can squeeze you in, Simone," and walked out without another word. I sat there stunned, throat dry, eyes burning, debating whether to scream or leave or call someone, anyone, but I knew how this would be spun. Emotional patient, unclear on procedure, maybe confused about coverage, possibly hostile. And I hated that even after decades of being the calmest person in every room, I was still having to weigh whether defending my dignity would cost me my care. It wasn't until a young black resident, barely in his late 20s, slipped in to check my vitals that I saw the full picture. He looked uncomfortable, overly cautious, until I said softly, "You don't have to pretend." And his face shifted, his voice lowered, and he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I heard them. They think you're one of the grant patients. Callahan doesn't like doing those. He rescheduled a few before you two. It's not right." I blinked, stunned, not just at the confirmation, but at how calmly he said it, like this wasn't new. Just normal for this place, a system I had poured millions into in my husband's memory, a place where I had believed my presence, my contribution, might shield someone else from this exact treatment. And now here I was, stripped down and invisible in the very building I'd helped build. I wanted to tell the young man everything. About the plaque with my name 2 floors up, about the scholarships I funded for kids who looked like him, about the fire I'd walked through to become the first black trauma surgeon in my medical school's history. But I just nodded, thanked him quietly, and sat with my fists clenched in my lap as the minutes ticked by, and I realized I was not just a patient today. I was a problem being deferred. And as the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, I remembered my mother, who died in a segregated ward in Mississippi when I was a child, denied proper treatment because she was not urgent enough. And I felt her rage boiling up in me now, generations of it, rising with every beep of the heart monitor next to me that no one was checking anymore. But I stayed still, breathing slowly, gathering names, dates, tones, everything, because they didn't know who I was, but they were about to. I stayed in that room for what felt like hours, no updates, no new time slot, just curtain whispers and the occasional glance from passing nurses who couldn't meet my eyes, like my presence was both inconvenient and uncomfortable. And as the ache in my gut pulsed deeper than the physical pain, I felt this wave of exhaustion settle in, not just from today but from everything, from the decades of fighting to be seen, from biting my tongue through residency, through operating rooms where I was asked to fetch coffee, through academic panels where I was the only black face in a sea of white coats nodding politely while doubting everything I said, and in that sterile space, wrapped in cotton and disbelief, my mind kept circling back to the irony that this hospital's surgical wing bore my name, that the check I'd written after Marcus died had literally paid for the equipment they were using today, and yet none of it had protected me from being reduced to a stereotype the moment I walked. And without my credentials stitched to my chest, I stared at the four drip beside me, bitter, silent, thinking of Marcus's voice, warm, steady, telling me years ago, "You've done enough, babe, let them carry the weight for a while," and how I'd laughed. Telling him I wasn't done building yet, that we needed a place where people who looked like us didn't get treated like second-class citizens in first-rate facilities, and now here I was, in that very place, invisible in my own house. I finally picked up my phone and called Miles, my godson, who answered in one ring and didn't even say hello, just, "What happened?" Because that's how tuned in he is to the frequency of injustice, and as I told him everything, step by step, name by name, I could hear the simmer in his voice rise into fire, the way it always does when he sees something broken and refuses to let it sit that way. He said, "We're not letting this slide, Auntie. Not again." And I believed him, because Miles isn't just a journalist, he's a disruptor, a truth teller with a following and a spine of steel, and when he gets a story in his teeth, he doesn't let go. I told him to be careful, that this could get ugly, that I wasn't sure I was ready to go public, but he cut me off and said, "You've already gone public, whether you like it or not. The moment they treated you like that, they made it a story. Now it's our job to write the ending." And suddenly something in me cracked open, something old and burning and long buried under surgical masks and board meetings and gala speeches. Anger, the kind that had built me, not broken me, and I let it fill the hollow space they had left. I started documenting everything: voice memos, times, staff names, quotes, and Miles promised to reach out to the hospital board anonymously first, give them a chance to respond, because, as he said, even wolves deserve a chance to recognize their reflection before they howl. Meanwhile, I got a call from someone on the administrative team, finally, a black woman named Janine who sounded panicked and overly sweet, saying there had been some confusion with the assignments, and they'd be happy to get me back on the schedule tomorrow, but her voice was tight, like someone had just screamed at her, and I knew. Miles had already pulled a thread and someone high up had felt the tug. I thanked her politely, declined the reschedule, and told her I would be filing a formal complaint, not just against Callahan, but against every person who saw me in pain and chose silence over service. She paused, clearly unsure what to say, and then offered, almost nervously, "We appreciate your feedback, Dr. Jackson," like she had only just realized who I was, and I nearly laughed, because it was always like this: recognition after the harm, respect after the insult, and the implied apology that never quite landed because it always came too late. After the call, I lay back on the bed, eyes open, the ceiling above me spinning slightly from hunger and rage and adrenaline, and I remembered how I used to sit in my mother's lap while she flipped through old ebony magazines, pointing at photos of black doctors and nurses, saying, "See, baby, they made it. We make it too." And how those images built a dream in me brick by brick, dream by dream, until I became the image myself, and now, here I was, being told by this institution I was less than, in a space that was only standing because I had dared to believe in better. I couldn't sleep that night, too many thoughts, too many emotions, so I sat in the hospital library, still in scrubs, scrolling through patient advocacy websites, pulling data on racial disparities and surgical delays, and every statistic stabbed like a scalpel. Black patients are 34% more likely to experience surgical postponement, 23% less likely to receive pain medication and pre-op, and overwhelmingly more likely to be labeled non-compliant by staff. And now my own story was a data point, a drop in that poison well, and I knew I had a choice to make. Let it fade quietly like so many others had, or name it, lift it, hold it to the light. So when Miles called the next morning and said, "We go public today. Are you ready?" I didn't hesitate. I said yes, not just for me, but for my mother, for the resident who dared to whisper the truth, for every patient whose pain had been ignored because their skin was the wrong color in the wrong hospital. And when I stepped out of that room, still sore, still bruised, I looked up at the bronze letters above the surgical wing doors, the Dr. Simone Jackson Surgical Wing, and I swore to myself, out loud, that they would never ignore that name again. It didn't take long. Miles dropped the story within 48 hours. Hospital delays surgery for black donor. Didn't know she funded the surgical wing. The headline spread like fire, not just because it was outrageous, but because it was real, and people were done pretending this kind of thing didn't happen every day in quieter ways. By noon, local stations were camped outside the hospital entrance. Board members were scrambling, and Dr. Callahan had been placed on immediate administrative leave, not for being racist, of course, but for procedural discrepancies, which is what they always call it when white men in power get caught being themselves. I watched it unfold not with glee, but with a deep, exhausted clarity, because this wasn't about revenge, it was about exposure, and once something is seen, it can't be unseen. The hospital's PR team reached out the same day, asking if I'd like to meet with the board privately to discuss a path forward, and I told them politely, no, thank you. My voice isn't private anymore. And the next morning, when the board called a press conference to do damage control, they held it right beneath the plaque that bears my name, and I made sure to be there. I walked in slowly, not with anger, but with composure, wearing a white coat that made no mistake about who I was. And when the chairman stammered through his statement about learning opportunities and equity training, I stepped forward and asked, calmly, into the mic, will your surgeons be trained to see black patients as human beings before or after the next lawsuit? The room went still, and I let that silence do the heavy lifting before I continued, not yelling, not even scolding, just telling the truth about what happened to me, and how often it happens to people who don't have the money, the name, or the platform to fight back. I didn't ask for an apology. I published the one they sent me, and let the public decide if it was enough. I didn't call for Callahan's head. I let the story speak for itself, and by week's end, he quietly resigned to pursue other opportunities, which is PR for you got caught and we need to clean house. More importantly, the hospital instituted new mandatory bias training and launched a review board led by community members, not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because visibility is a powerful disinfectant, and I had made sure the lights were on. When I returned weeks later to finally have my surgery under a new doctor, an Indian woman named Dr. Patel, who greeted me with warmth, read my file like it mattered, and called me Dr. Jackson. Without blinking, I felt something settle in me, like an old weight loosening from my chest. I walked past that same pre-op wing, the same nurses, the same silence, but this time, they looked up and stood, not because I was a donor, not because I was on the news, but because now, they knew I was watching, and so was the world.